Sloan looked me straight in the eyes and told me he could do things I'd never be capable of. She said it like she was trying to twist a blade in my ribs. What she didn't realize, though, was that I'd already made the move that would end it all. By the time the sun came up, the secret life she'd been building behind my back was going to be total history, and she'd have nobody to look at but herself. The night I caught them, I wasn't even supposed to be in the building. One of my clients, a big logistics outfit called Datamark, was throwing a corporate bash over at the Winslow Grand. That happened to be the same hotel where Sloan had been running events for the last 6 years. When the guy from Datamark, Nate, first reached out, I almost passed on the invite. But we were looking at an $80,000 contract, and Nate was the kind of guy who preferred to shake hands and look a man in the eye before signing anything. So, I threw on a blazer and made the drive across town. The party was up on the second-floor ballroom. I showed up a bit early and was just hanging out in the hallway near the service entrance, checking some messages on my phone. That's when I heard her laugh. It wasn't coming from the party, though, it was coming from a side room further down the hall. The door was sitting open just a few inches. Through the gap, I saw Sloan with her back against the wall. There was a guy there I'd never laid eyes on, tall, wearing a sharp, fitted shirt with his hair slicked back. He had his hand resting right on the small of her back. She was leaning into him, looking completely comfortable, not making a single move to pull away. They had no idea I was watching. I stood there, frozen, for maybe 5 seconds. Then I just turned around, walked into that ballroom, shook Nate's hand, and finalized the deal over a glass of club soda. When Sloan finally made it home that night, I acted like everything was normal and asked how her shift went. She just tossed her keys on the counter and muttered that it was a long one, just a standard banquet, nothing special. 21 years of marriage, and that was the very first lie I'd ever caught her in. My name's Elias Thorne. I'm 47 years old. I run a small digital security firm out in Austin with 4 employees, working out of a rented spot off Lamar. Basically, companies pay us to find the holes in their computer networks before the bad guys do. I've been in the security game since my 20s. Sloan and I bought our place in Cedar Park back when our son, Caleb, was only 3. The mortgage is almost a memory at this point. We've been a couple for 21 years, and married for 18 of those. She always kept the house running like a well-oiled machine. I really respected that about her, and I made sure to tell her so. Maybe I didn't say it often enough, I don't know. For 2 days after the hotel incident, I didn't say a word. It wasn't because I was in shock, it was because I don't make a move until I have all the facts in front of me. That's just how my mind operates. But things came to a head on Saturday morning. I told her I had to cancel our anniversary trip to Fredericksburg because a new client was dealing with a ransomware crisis and I had a hard deadline. Sloan slammed her coffee mug down so hard the liquid splashed out. She started yelling, telling me I always do this to her. The fight got heated fast. I kept my cool, but she definitely didn't. And that's when she let it slip. He does things you could never do. The whole kitchen went dead silent. Sloan blinked, trying to walk it back. She tried to claim she meant that I never prioritize us, but she hadn't said people or anyone. She said he. I just smiled. Not because I thought it was funny, but because she'd finally given me a target. I told her she was right and that I needed to do better. Then I just walked into my office and shut the door. My hands didn't shake while I was typing, but I felt like something inside me had snapped. 21 years. I thought about Caleb taking his first steps in our living room. I thought about the summer we painted the house and Sloan spilled a whole gallon of primer on the porch. She'd laughed so hard she couldn't catch her breath. That stain is actually still there if you know where to look. And now, this guy. I spent 10 minutes sitting there, and then I got to work. My job isn't really about hacking in the movie sense. It's about finding the trail people leave out in the open: social media, payments, public records. Most people end up burying themselves if you look hard enough. Sloan was no exception. The first lead was an Instagram account for a guy named Julian Vance. He was a fitness trainer who rented a studio right in the wellness wing of the Winslow Grand. I found her buried in his tagged photos, 3 different hotel events, and Sloan was in the background of every single one, always standing right next to him. The second lead was our joint credit card. Sloan always took care of the statements. I found 7 months of recurring charges listed as wellness private sessions on Tuesday and Thursday nights at 8 p.m. That wasn't a gym class. That was Julian's private massage room. The third hit took a bit more digging. I found bank transfers under $500 going to an account I didn't recognize, small amounts, $200 here, $350 there. She'd labeled them as groceries or dry cleaning. 7 months of it, totaling over $6,800. I had every receipt, every timestamp, and every fake label she'd typed out to cover her tracks. I printed the whole mess out, locked it in my desk, and started thinking about who I needed to call. I knew the Winslow Grand inside and out. 2 years back, the GM, Mike Castelli, had hired my firm to audit their network after a security scare. I'd spent 3 weeks in that building. Mike and I stayed friendly, grabbed lunch every now and then. I remembered him telling me over a few beers last fall that the wellness wing was causing him headaches. A guest had complained about noise coming from the private rooms late at night. The hotel had looked into it, and Julian Vance's name had come up, along with $14,000 in unpaid rent and complaints from other tenants. Mike had let it slide because the wing was still making money, but he kept the file open. One more slip-up, and the guy was gone. Monday morning, 9:15. I called him. "Mike, it's Elias Thorne. I stumbled onto something you should probably know about, not just as a friend, but as your former contractor. You've got a staff member using hotel space for personal meetings with one of your tenants. The same tenant who's behind on his rent." The line went quiet for a second. Mike asked which staff member it was. I gave him the name and offered to send over the credit card logs and the scheduling overlaps. Just clean data, no drama. Mike's voice got real professional. He told me to send it over and said he'd take it from there. The call took less than 5 minutes. I didn't feel any satisfaction, just a hollow, ringing sensation in my chest, like I'd just pulled the pin on a grenade. All I could do then was wait. Things moved a lot faster than I expected. By Wednesday, Julian's lease was terminated. Mike had the unpaid rent and the complaints, and now he had proof that an employee was helping him abuse the space. Julian had 48 hours to get out. On Thursday afternoon, Sloan got called into HR. They didn't fire her, but they restructured her. They moved her from event coordinator to a back-office admin desk. No more evening events, no more ballroom floor. On paper, the title looked okay, but it was basically a career death sentence. She came home looking like a ghost. She dropped her bag by the door and didn't even bother taking off her coat. She looked at me, testing the waters, and told me something had happened at work. "What happened?" I asked. She told me they'd restructured her role out of nowhere and that Mike said they were going in a different direction. She just stood there, waiting to see how I'd react. I didn't give her anything. I just poured her a glass of water and asked what she wanted for dinner. This is how the rest of the story unfolds. I've kept that same steady, first-person perspective, just a man telling it like it is, getting his life back on track. That night, I could hear her voice coming through the bathroom door, low, sharp, and frantic. I didn't have to press my ear to the wood to know who was on the other end of that line. But what happened next caught me off guard. When Sloan finally walked out, her eyes were bloodshot and her jaw was set like stone. Whatever Julian had to say, it sure wasn't what she wanted to hear. Apparently, he'd accused her of being the snitch, blamed her for losing his studio and then just hung up on her. She stood there in the hallway, clutching her phone and staring at the wall like a ghost. For a split second, I felt something in me start to soften. Just a tiny bit. But then I remembered, and the feeling vanished. Friday morning, I walked into my lawyer Elena Rodriguez's office and put pen to paper. She had everything, the bank statements, the credit card logs, the whole paper trail showing exactly how $6,840 of our money ended up in the pocket of the guy my wife was seeing. Elena told me it didn't guarantee a perfect split, but it definitely put us in the driver's seat for negotiations. The house was already in my name since I'd bought it before we ever got hitched, and I'd paid the mortgage out of my business account. Elena told me to just sit tight and let the legal gears turn. I wasn't planning on telling Sloane just yet. But Sloane had other plans for the weekend. Saturday morning, I stepped out to grab some coffee, and when I walked back into the kitchen, there she was. She was holding those printed bank statements I'd tucked away in my desk drawer. She'd found the spare key. Her hands were shaking so hard the paper was rattling. "Did you do this?" she asked. "Did you call Mike?" I set my coffee down and looked her dead in the eye. $6,840, Sloane. That's how much of our money you handed over to him. Groceries. Dry cleaning. I let that sink in for a beat. You actually labeled it, dry cleaning. She couldn't find a single word to say. I told her straight, I'd filed for divorce the day before, and I was keeping the house. I told her my lawyer already had copies of everything she was holding and that she'd better find herself a lawyer of her own. Over the next hour, I watched her cycle through every play in the book. First, it was denial. She claimed those payments were just for wellness sessions, told me it was self-care, all while holding proof that the money went straight to Julian Vance's personal account, not the hotel. When that didn't work, she tried to turn it on me. Said I was never around, that I always picked work over her, and brought up the anniversary trip I'd cancelled. Then came the third play, the one that almost got to me. The tears. Real ones. She slid down against the kitchen cabinet and just sat there on the tile, sobbing that raw, gasping kind of way that used to make me drop everything to comfort her. 18 years of marriage had practically hardwired that response into my brain. Usually, if she cried, I moved. This time, my feet stayed right where they were. "I'm not doing this anymore," I said. She looked up, begging. "Elias, please. It was a mistake. Julian doesn't mean anything. He was just." And then she said it again. "He does things you could never do." Her own words, thrown back at me in the same kitchen, by the same counter, just a different Saturday. I pointed that out to her. Her face went totally blank, like she was listening to a recording of something she'd already tried to delete. The fight just drained out of her right then, like air hissing out of a flat tire. I told her she had the weekend to figure things out and that my lawyer would be sending over the terms on Monday. Then I walked out, hopped in my truck, and went to the office to work until midnight. Sunday evening, I was out on the back porch with my laptop when a truck I didn't recognize pulled into the driveway. It was Julian Vance. Up close, he didn't look anything like the hotshot I'd seen in the hotel hallway. He looked smaller, scruffy, wearing a wrinkled polo shirt. He walked up the steps like a man heading to a courtroom. "You Elias?" he asked, hands in his pockets. He told me he wasn't there to cause trouble. He claimed Sloane told him we were already finished, that the divorce was already happening. He even said he didn't know the money she gave him came from my account, she'd told him it was her own savings. I just studied him. The guy was built like he lived in a gym, which I guess he had, until I made that call. "How long?" I asked. 7 months, he said. He told me she'd convinced him I was a workaholic who didn't care about her anymore. While she was telling me she was working late every Tuesday and Thursday, she was telling him she was leaving me. Julian closed his eyes, looking like he'd aged a decade in a week. She told me she was staying with me, he muttered. It seemed Sloane had a different version of the truth for everybody. He just nodded once, walked back to his truck, and drove off. I watched his taillights fade into the distance. Then, I called my son, Caleb, at Texas State. We'd only talked about tuition lately, but when he picked up, I told him I just wanted to hear his voice. We talked for 40 minutes. I gave him the broad strokes of what was happening. He was quiet for a long time, and then he just said, "You're gonna be all right, Dad." Things moved fast after that. The paperwork was pretty ironclad thanks to those transfers she'd coded as groceries. Her lawyer didn't have much of a leg to stand on. I kept the house, we split the retirement stuff, and she signed off on my business. It was a clean break. No big legal war. Sloane packed up on a Tuesday while I was at work. When I got home, half the closet was empty. Her key was sitting on the counter next to a note that just said, "I'm sorry for everything. No return address." I read it twice, tucked it in a drawer, and made myself some dinner. She moved in with her sister in Dallas, and that was the last I heard of her. As for Julian, word gets around the Austin fitness scene pretty quick. Between losing his studio and his reputation, his clients bailed. A buddy of mine told me Julian headed to San Antonio in April to try and start over where nobody knew his story. In a way, Sloane did him worse than she did me. I found out the truth on my own terms. He got blindsided by a woman who told him exactly what he wanted to hear. Caleb came home for a weekend in late April. We grilled some steaks and watched the Astros lose to the Rangers. We didn't even mention his mother. When he left on Sunday, he gave me a longer hug than usual. "Call me more, Dad," he said. "Not just about the money." I told him it was a deal. I eventually had to go back to the Winslow Grand. Mike Castelli called me in May with a new contract, a full security overhaul for the entire hotel group across 4 locations in Texas. It was the kind of big project I'd wanted for years but never took because Sloane always fought me on it. She thought it was too much travel, too risky. She loved the word stable, which I realized was just her way of saying she wanted to stand still. Mike and I sat in the hotel restaurant, just 20 feet from the hallway where I'd first seen Sloane with Julian. He slid a folder across the table, a 3-year deal. "I never asked what went down with you and Sloane," Mike said, leaning in. "And I won't. But I did everything by the book. What you sent me matched our records. Nobody got hurt who didn't deserve it." I told him I appreciated that. 2 years ago, I would have had to check with Sloane. 6 months ago, I was watching my life fall apart in this very building. I closed the folder and told him, "We're doing this." I put the house on the market in June. Not because I had to, but because every room felt like it was haunted by a 21-year lie. That primer stain on the back porch didn't make me laugh anymore, it just looked like a scar. I put the sign up on Monday, and by Thursday, I had 2 offers over the asking price. I signed a lease on a new, bigger office downtown and hired a couple of new people. My little 4-person shop was finally growing. On moving day, the last Saturday in June, Caleb came down to help me load the truck. We carried the final box out together, and he looked at the empty house and said it felt weird. "Yeah," I said. "A good kind of weird, though." I turned the key one last time, handed it to the realtor, and climbed into my truck. I called my new analyst, Amani, and told her the Winslow project was a go. As I pulled onto the main road, I looked in the mirror. The house, the porch, and that old stain all got smaller and smaller until they were gone. I just kept driving.